Collection that I have downstairs called Dead Orphans, and it's a horror western, for lack of a better phrase, weird western, whatever you want to call it. And quick warning, content warning on violence toward women. No glorification of it, but it does exist. So the man hopped down from the top step of the wagon, grabbed his pack of belongings from the back, and spat on the ground. As the wagon rumbled off, stirring dust around him, he sauntered toward the nearest saloon. Two thirsts needed to be slaked, the first wet and fiery. Finding an empty table, the man took over an empty chair facing the door and placed his belongings between his boots. The place was mostly empty. The majority of the sparse patrons gathered around the faro table in the corner. Some were playing, others spectating while ribbing and goading the players. "What can I get you, mister?" He shifted his gaze to find a young lady, not more than 16, beside him in a simple blue cotton dress. She was barely taller standing than him sitting. Her long blonde hair had been tied into a simple ponytail, while some strands ran down the sides of her face, having escaped their enclosure. "Just a shot of rye, ma'am, and whatever snacks you got." The young lady nodded and left to fill the order. While he waited, the man looked through the dirty windows of the saloon as best he could, trying to get a make of the town. Across from the saloon was a bank. On one side of that was a mercantile, but it was the building on the other side of the bank that caught the man's attention. Standing outside of it were two young women, both in simple white cotton dresses. Between them stood one of the ugliest fellows the man had ever seen, but based on the attentive women's hands upon his arms, back, and shoulders, he had enough money for them to overlook his physical appearance. "Here's your drink, sir," the server said as she placed the shot glass and a plate of hardtack on the table. "That'll be 2 bits. No charge for the bread. You can pay at the bar if you like." Then she shuffled off to attend to the men around the faro table. The man swallowed the rye in a single shot, wincing at its bite. No doubt it had been cut with turpentine or some other nasty concoction to make the bottle go further. He tried unsuccessfully to bite into the bread and, after banging it on the side of the table a few times, deemed it inedible before tossing it back onto the plate. Digging through his shirt pocket, he found 4 bits, tossed it on the table, then left the saloon. He walked cattywampus across the way toward the brothel, careful to avoid horse and cow piles in the dusty street. When he reached the empty front step, he stomped his boots to free as much dust as possible from them, then went inside. The first thing he noticed was a huge man standing to the right of the door, arms crossed. The behemoth had to be at least 6.5 feet tall and probably had to turn sideways to get out the front door. His head was bald, either naturally or by choice, and a large bushy mustache hid his mouth, the lengths of hair extending several inches beyond his chin on each side. A nod greeted the guest, which was quickly returned. "Greetings, sir. Welcome to Bella's place," came a soft, lilting voice with a southern drawl. Through the swinging doors in front of the man came a tall, black-haired lady decked out in a long black, red, and white gown, the length of which barely covered her laced-up boots as she walked. The dress was adorned with white lace, as was the closed parasol she used as a walking stick. "I am Bella, of course. Please, have a seat." "Thank you, ma'am, but I need to get going soon. If it's all the same to you, I'd like to get down to business." The man removed his hat as he spoke, his eyes on the madam's parasol, boots, the spittoon behind her, anything but her eyes. Bella continued, "I can understand that. Now, since you've not been here before, Mr. Jones." "Very well, Mr. Jones. As I was saying, choosing one of our girls to spend some time with is a privilege reserved for our repeat customers. So if you would kindly tell me what kind of lady you prefer, I can summon the best one for you." The man's eyes continued to look at everything except Bella, the large framed paintings, sweeping staircases, vases, plus tables and trunks and chairs gilded with gold paint. "It might be rude, but can you tell me how much one of your girls is? I have money, but I don't like making deals without knowing how much it'll cost me first." "Not a problem, Mr. Jones," Bella said, stressing the surname he'd given. "As a businesswoman myself, I always make sure I know what's at stake and what's to gain before entering into a contract. How else do you think I came to own most of the businesses on the side of the street, including the bank?" For the first time, the man's gaze met Bella's, his wide eyes meeting her dark brown ones. He opened his mouth to speak, but finding nothing adequate or appropriate to say, closed it again. "Whites are $5, Bella continued. "Blacks are $3. We also have a Chinese and a Creek Indian, and each of them are $7. The man pulled a coin purse from his bag, withdrew $3 coins, and offered them to Bella. A giant hand appeared in front of him, palm up. All the man could do was stare at the massive hand, noting the beast blocked all sunlight from the window. For such a big man, he smelled of lilac and rose, which threw the guest off for a moment. Finally, he deposited the coins in the hand, which closed and moved away. "Miss Emily?" Bella called and smiled at her customer. Soon, a black woman who appeared to be in her 50s stood at the top of the steps. The white gown she wore stood in stark contrast to her skin, and the man noticed the years had not been kind to the whore's face, which was covered in wrinkled rivulets. "Do you have anyone, younger?" Bella smiled and cocked her head slightly. "For $3, a first-time guest, and my choice? No, sir. Mr. Emily will take proper care of you, I promise." The man nodded. "I will say, Miss Bella, that I have a tendency to like my play, shall we say, rough." His eyes avoided hers again. "I hope that will not be a problem." "While bruises may not show as much on Miss Emily as they might on some of our fairer girls, they are indeed deterrents to future customers just the same." Bella glanced over her shoulder at her employee, who was still standing at the top of the steps, hands clasped in front of her. "Miss Emily can certainly accommodate you in whatever manner of business you wish to conduct, but we do ask that you return her in the same condition you found her, other than exhausted from doing her job." "Yes, ma'am," he said simply, his eyes focused on Emily. "That I can do." "Good, because if you do not, Mr. Stanley here will escort you outside, and I cannot promise he will use his gentlest manner." After a nod of agreement from the man and a slight gesture from Bella's free hand, Emily descended the steps to greet her customer. The man noticed as she approached that her breast swayed, not bobbed. Still, he hoped she would do just fine for him. Emily took the man's hand and slowly led him upstairs. They proceeded to the end of the hallway, and as they went, several girls, not already entertaining customer, watched them as they passed. Some smiled, some frowned, some appeared to be far away, perhaps in an opium dream. Finally, they reached her room, and Emily escorted him through the door, then closed it behind them. "Would you like me to undress, or would you like to do it for me?" she asked. "No, you can do it. I enjoy watching that." Emily smiled and pulled the white gown over her head, revealing her naked body. The man looked at the saggy breasts, stretch marked lined belly that hung low, almost covering her thatch of hair. Thick thighs rippled with creases. Even her face looked tired and worn. "Have you had kids before?" Miss Emily squinted at the man a moment before answering. "Yes, sir, 4 of them, all girls." He nodded and stepped close to her. His hand touched her throat, and she lifted her chin in response. It then slid down her arm, over the waddle of flesh at the back of her upper arm, down to her wrist, feeling every wrinkle as he went. He paused for a moment, his thumb running back and forth in the valleys between the bones on the back of her hand. The hand became a fist, the back of it striking hard against Emily's jaw. She grunted and fell backward, sitting on the edge of the bed. Her wide eyes stared at him, blood oozing from her lip and corner of her mouth. As she opened her mouth to say something, she barely had time to brace before another fist struck the side of her head, then another, and another. Emily's body was knocked to her side by the blows, crimson splattering the pillow, comforter, wall, and bedside lamp. As her arms flailed, searching, the man crawled onto the bed and straddled the prostitute. A barrage of punches found arms, face, ribs, chest, and succession of crunching and snapping accompanied them. Finally, Emily's hand found a rope and pulled it, managing to do so several times before her body went limp. The lack of resistance did not deter her attacker, and he continued to assault her, not noticing or caring about her bruised and bloody knuckles, nor the red covering his shirt and vest and pants. He continued striking the motionless whore until he felt something clamp around his neck and apply pressure at the back of his head. The man struggled for a few moments until all went dark. The man slowly opened his eyes, finding a large crowd of people in front of him, some blocked out by Stanley's massive form. It took the man a moment to realize the crowd didn't look right because they were sideways, and he sat up on the front porch of Bella's. His head swam and ached, and he had to put a hand down to steady himself. "Mr. Jones, you disappoint me," said Bella as she stepped around Stanley. "Rules exist for a reason, and they are meant to be followed. Otherwise, this would be a lawless town, not one people look for as a peaceful stop as they cross Indian territory from Fort Smith." She adjusted the now open parasol to block the sun, then continued. You're lucky Stanley here stopped choking you when you blacked out instead of depriving that brain of yours its precious blood." Bella gestured down the street with a dismissive gesture. "Otherwise, you would have been an unknowing customer down at Gabby's Coffin Company." The man started, then decided he didn't really have anything to say in his defense. He'd agreed to what Miss Bella and Miss Emily were offering, and just because he didn't like it didn't mean he could break the agreement. In panic, his hand searched for his coin purse, finding it on the steps beside him. Yes, Mr. Jones, you have your coins. They could have easily been lost on your way down, what with Miss Emily needing some extensive care from Doc Rogers. You're just lucky she didn't need Gabby's services, or you'd be dancing from a noose by sunset. The man opened his mouth to say something, but again, finding no words that would serve his purpose, he closed it. He stuck the coin purse back in his bag. While he couldn't find his hat, he decided it would be best not to ask if he could go back inside to retrieve it. His eyes moved between Miss Bella and her mountain of a protector, waiting for them to give him instruction as he was obviously at their mercy. Bella was the first to break the low murmur of discussion among the townspeople. Since you have a very specific appetite that exceeds what we allow here at my fine establishment, I suggest you head on down the road west of here. The man looked in that direction and waited for her to continue. Take the first two left forks. After the second one, maybe 30 minutes ride from there, you'll see a house a couple of hills off the left. It's got an oak tree on either side of it, so it's easy to spot. The madam paused for a moment before continuing. There you'll find the widow Reed. She's had a couple husbands since she moved out this way, and I hear tell a few before that. Word is that she loves your type of entertainment and will meet you, so to speak, blow for blow. I don't have any way to get out there, the man managed. Well, you have boots, don't you? And based on the licking you gave Miss Emily, you're plenty strong too. Bella paused and looked around her, finding several nodding residents. But I tell you what, I don't want you too tired for Widow Reed, so I'll let you borrow a horse from my stable near the end of town. Tell Bobby there that you want the old dapple. He'll take care of you. The man waited to see if she had any more to add, and Bella added, Get along now, we'll retrieve the horse later. As the man stood and swayed, Stanley faked a step toward him and laughed when the stranger flinched, the humor not what the stranger expected from the giant. The man then gathered his bag and walked toward the edge of town. Just as Bella had indicated, Bobby had an old dapple mare to ride, offering nothing to the stranger but a wry smile while also refusing payment. Then the man was on his way. Along the ride, the man considered not stopping at all to just keep riding to the next town. While the urge to get as far away from town as possible was potent, he knew he'd be labeled a horse thief if he didn't return the mare. So after some contemplation, he decided to meet the Widow Reed, have some reciprocated fun, then return the horse and catch the first wagon or coach out of town. The madam had given vague directions to his destination, so he didn't have any sense for how long it would take, but he found himself approaching the Widow Reed's house after only 3 hours or so on the trail. As he approached, a young woman in her 20s stepped out the front door, shotgun in hand. I'm looking for your mama, the Widow Reed, he called out to her. The woman squinted at the stranger. That's me. What are you doing out here off the road? We aren't too fond of strangers around here. He looked at the rolling hills around him where not another house could be spotted and tried to figure out who we were. I respect that. Miss Bella sent me. Shotgun barrel now on her shoulder, the widow eyed him. She did she? Why? She said you had similar tastes as mine. He felt uncomfortable talking about it with a woman he just met, unless they were sorrel doves anyway. Miss Bella, sure. This widow, that was harder. The blood on his clothes would likely tell her more than he could anyway. Well, if she sent you, then I suspect I know why. And yes, it does get lonely out here, so I don't mind the occasional stranger stopping by for an overnight visit. The widow appeared at the sun for a moment. But it's a hard life out here. I only get by on what extra food I can grow and sell, or the odd pelts from wandering wolves. It'll cost you. How much? The man braced himself for an exorbitant amount. Well, Miss Bella does all right with some of her exotic girls for $7. So let's say 10. He nodded, keeping to himself that he'd been willing to spend up to 50 if she was equal to his appetites, as reputed. Fair enough. Toss the coins this way. He did as he was instructed, and she gathered them up and dropped them into a pocket of her apron. Draw some water from the pump for your horse, give her some, then tie her to the post over by that tree. The widow gestured to one side of the house. You can feed her later. I know Bobby takes good care of his gal, so she'll be fine for a while. Once the man had done that, the widow gestured for him to follow her into the house. The inside was a simple one-room affair with a kitchen table, cooking space, and bed. He figured that without any kids around, she must not have needed any privacy anyway. A peg by the door served as the place to hang a hat, and he started to remove his before remembering he'd left it in Miss Emily's room. So he placed his bag below the hook, knowing it would be within sight of the bed. What's your name, mister? Jones. No, it's not. I can tell when somebody's lying to me. What's your name? Her eyes narrowed as she challenged him. Jimmy Marshall, with 2 L's. All right, Mr. Marshall with 2 L's, she said as she gestured to the chair by the table. Take your boots off and make yourself comfortable. You're going to be here a while, she added with a wink. And you'll pardon me if I don't use your first name. Business is business, but I don't often have repeat customers. No sense getting personal, you know. Without a word, the man sat and removed his boots. While they did this, the widow poured some water into a basin and a wet cloth. And when she'd stood again, she removed his clothes in a businesslike manner, no teasing, no playful banter, and washed him from brow to toe. I do have one rule, and that's no kissing on the mouth, the widow told her. This is a business transaction, not a relationship. Understood, he replied, having no intention of doing so anyway. The widow led him to the bed while she removed her clothes slowly, but again in a businesslike manner and nothing more. The coins in her apron pocket jingled when she dropped it to the floor, and Jimmy made a note to retrieve them later when she was sleeping. When she was done, she stood and let his eyes wander over her. He stepped toward her and gently caressed her breast, down her sides and legs, then finally to her buttocks. The man pulled her toward him, then pushed her toward the bed. Let me take care of you first, Mr. Marshall with 2 L's, Widow Reed whispered as she rubbed him to full attention. Then you can do what you want with me. Yes, ma'am, he replied, knowing that he could go again and again with no problem, so he might as well let her have her bit of fun before he could really let loose. Widow Reed turned slowly, still in his grasp, and inched toward the edge of the bed. When he felt the mattress against the back of his thighs, he freed himself and sprawled on the bed, motioning her toward him with his hands. Happy 2 strangers, she cooed and straddled him. Immediately, Jimmy could tell she was aroused, and he adjusted his hips until their bodies were joined. She leaned forward, licking his ear, then left a trail of kisses down his chest before giving his nipple a quick nip with her teeth. His body jerked from the unexpected pain, but it only served to further excite him, and he grasped her shoulders harder. The widow moved slowly to the other side of his chest and gave his other nipple the same treatment. This time, Jimmy was expecting it and reveled in the erotic sensation it gave him. Man, you do like it rough, ma'am. You have no idea, she said as she winked up at him from where her chin rested just below his. Then she sat straight up, grabbed his wrist, and fell forward, pinning them against the wall. Her tongue trailed up his chest to a bicep, where she bit hard, breaking skin slightly. Jimmy jumped at the pain, having never received anything so intense from a woman before. But he knew his time was coming, then he could really show her what he's capable of. The gentle sound of her sucking at the new wound only further aroused him, and he grinned in anticipation. Once again, Widow Reed worked a trail with her tongue and lips across his chest from one bicep to the other, where she clamped down with her teeth and ripped a mouthful of flesh and muscle from his bicep. Her face was instantly in front of his, and she worked the meat in her mouth, blood spilling over her lips and chin to drip on his chest. Damn, woman, what the... he said, then screamed the loudest of his life as the widow hooked both hands inside his elbows and jerked outward, separating both of his shoulders. Jimmy tried to lift his arms to push this hellcat off him, but even the slightest movement shot jolts of pain through his arms and chest. He bucked his hips, but found them pinned as if trapped under a mountain. His head swam, but he finally managed to regain his focus, and he found the widow staring at him, still chewing slowly on her meal. As he squinted, she held both palms out to him, and long, curved talons grew from her fingertips. They dropped quickly to his chest, and he felt them dig into his flesh, each a fiery nail so strong he couldn't distinguish them. Then she dragged them down his chest, leaving crimson furrows in their wake. Jimmy screamed again and once more tried to get the widow off of him, to no avail. He remembered when he'd stepped into gopher hole as a kid, trying to retrieve a stallion that had broken out of the pen, and how he had used long, slow breaths to control the pain in his ankle and regain focus. But this was worse, so much worse. Jimmy, the widow simply said, and he looked at her face again, a voice at the back of his head incongruously noting that she'd used his first name. Just as he met her eyes, the irises turned yellow, pupils reduced to pinpoints, and her cheekbones rose and sharpened. Her ears extended to points and her teeth transformed to a forest of fangs, the uppers extending below her lower lip. The widow lifted her chin, arching her chest toward Jimmy, and he felt the bed begin to vibrate. A loud screech escaped her lips as a pair of leathery black wings extended fully, a loud snap filling the house as they did. They moved back and forth slowly, and he felt a slight breeze from them. Finally, she lowered her head and stared into Jimmy's eyes. the yellow in hers almost shimmering. "Almost done, mister." The voice that came from the widow's mouth was both deep, as if echoed from the deepest cave, while also as dry as the western desert. Each thumb poked deep into his abdomen before finding purchase under his lowest rib, which she popped from his chest with a loud snap. Then she moved to the next rib, and the next, slowly working his chest open. Jimmy's mouth flew open, but no sound came out. He threw his head back and focused long enough to see the wall and headboard bejeweled with his own blood, dots and lines of ruby and garnet and cinnabar. Then the pain overwhelmed him, and all was black. Sometime later, Bobby rode up on his favorite Appaloosa gelding and untied the dapple mare from the post, fastening her reins to the back of his saddle. He stopped for a moment to watch the smoke rising from the widow's chimney, the sickly sweet smell accompanying it, something he could never get used to. Then he turned his steed back toward town and left the widow Reed alone with her latest meal. Thank you. Questions?
What inspired that? If you could pinpoint anything in particular.
My wife is my alpha reader. She asks me that all the time, but it's usually in the form of, "What the fuck is wrong with you?" I had written, there's a series called Six Guns Straight from Hell that has some horror, weird Western, and I had a story published in that. That it was the first time I'd ever written something like that. It actually was a derivative of Gollum stories, where you have some similar to that. And then later on, I saw another call for a weird Western anthology, and I wrote that story, and it didn't get accepted. And that's what it is. It's titled Dead Orphans because it's stories that were never published. They're orphans, they're homeless. And so this is just one of those stories that never found a home, so I just published it as.
Awesome.
So it's just one of those things. There's inspirations in it, like, we live in Northwest Arkansas, and Fort Smith, Arkansas was a big base for people going out into Indian Territory, which you heard referenced in there too. So that's also the home of the famous Isaac Parker, the hanging judge. That's where he was from too. So there's some of those touches of home thrown in there too to kind of give those grounds. And I actually did a lot of reading about the Old West and the life of prostitutes in the Old West and added some of that. One of the things I had found was how much power those women had in those cities. And this is, I don't remember her name, but Bella in here was directly an inspiration for somebody who literally owned 3/4 of the town in town, because she had either had made wise investments or, she had dirt on everybody. So she had a lot of leverage in financial deals, let's just say that. So kind of threw that in there too, so.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks y'all, appreciate it.